Jacobs. I just spent the last 3 years as Director of Member Services at the Minnesota Council on Foundations. And so I'm here to give you a little bit of background on foundations, who they are, what they fund, as well as talking about sort of getting ready to search for grant makers so that you can be ready to apply for grants when the time comes. So I just want to show of hands, how many of you feel like you are total beginners to grant writing, the aspects of grant making, all of that kind of total beginners? Okay. And how many of you maybe feel like you're sort of maybe intermediate, like I kind of think I know what I'm doing, maybe I've written a grant or two? We've got maybe like, okay, maybe 4 or so. Okay, that's good. So I did some grant writing about 6 years ago, and you know, when I started, I didn't actually realize quite the importance of understanding foundations themselves. Not only what they care about, but also their types. So we're going to talk quite a bit about that, and then we're going to go into what they fund, who they fund, etc. Yes, so just to reiterate also what Jessica said earlier, we're not actually going to get into the grant writing. That will probably be the part 2 of whatever comes after this, maybe in April. So, okay, so foundations and their types. So what are foundations? So foundations are actually tax-exempt nonprofit entities. Is that moving? Yeah, you might need to use your thing. Sorry about that. Maybe we can adjust the screen, we'll see. But I'm going to keep talking while we do that. So they support charitable activities for the common good, and they're usually funded by a principal fund or set of assets that are usually an endowment that are formed by a family, an individual, a corporation, etc. And they aid public charities, like probably many of the ones that you're with right now. So, oh, that looks great, better. Some foundations are actually also public charities, and we'll talk about that a little bit too. And they primarily make grants using the earned income from investing those endowments. And there's sort of a broad range of organizations that foundations can fund. They have to be unrelated organizations, so unrelated to the foundation, but they can fund organizations, institutions, individuals for scientific, educational, cultural, religious, and other charitable purposes. So very broad. Things that foundations can fund. But philanthropy is mission-based and values-driven. Also values-based and mission-driven. So they are a composite of donor, trustee, and staff values. Usually the foundation is formed with the intent of the original donor, and then as other directors and staff come in, the direction of the foundation can evolve. And as I said before, foundation type plays an enormous role in the foundation's approach to funding, given how much contact they want with you, how much contact they can have with you, what they fund, and how much they're able to fund. And these values also drive their relationships with the community and their grant-making approach in general. So there are several continuums that we think of when we're thinking about philanthropy. You can think of it like as a charity to social justice continuum. So there are people who fund in homelessness who fund beds and shelters and fund sort of on that end of a continuum. There might be other funders who fund down more on a strategic or social justice end of the continuum, where they're actually funding more at the strategic causes and roots of homelessness. So we see funding that happens all along that continuum, and none of that is bad or wrong. It sort of depends on what the foundation is interested in funding. I also, when I was starting to do some grant writing, I really thought that grant making was about money, and it's not about money, it's about mission. So this is actually a quote from an executive director of the Family Foundation. And the things that really stick out to me is when she says, so with all recommendations, they seek to make a strong case for organizations that I feel best reflect the foundation's interest and demonstrate the program and organizational capacity to succeed, and here's the big takeaway, at our mutual goals of community change and betterment. So foundations are looking for partners in their work. They have identified problems in the field that they're hoping to address. And they're looking for organizations that are also interested in helping meet those needs. So none of this says anything about money. This says about mission and striving for community change and betterment. Also, what you need to know about grant makers is that they tend to be pretty small. The field is pretty small. There's about a little less than 1,500 foundations in Minnesota, and the majority give less than $250,000 a year. So 9% give $1 million or more annually, and so they're doing the majority of grant making. So that's about 132 foundations that most of your organizations are probably trying to seek funding from. And so the majority of those smaller foundations in the $250,000 a year or less are non-staffed family foundations. So that's like mom and dad and the kids getting together a couple times a year to figure out where they're going to give their grants. And even those foundations that have staff, they tend to be small staff. There's maybe 2 people who work there. So, so definitely when we're talking about in your search for grant makers, how much they're able to communicate with you, whether there are professional staff who can communicate with you, a lot of that is actually dependent upon their asset size and how much they're able to give in a given year. So we're going to talk about 3 main types of foundations, and we're going to put them in sort of big, broad buckets, and then we can break them down later if you'd like. So family and private independent foundations. So these were most likely started by an individual family or group of families. They're the most prevalent type of foundation. And so their grant making comes from their assets and investment earnings. And they are required by law to do a 5% payout per year. So they give 38% of Minnesota's grant dollars. I'm going to have a graph later that will show you the comparison of all of the types. But family experience and family values often guide the family decision making, or the grant decision making. So if you think of your own family, you know, think of like the experiences of your parents and your grandparents, or their cultural experiences that were part to them, their ethnic background, what kind of employment they were a part of, what communities they lived in, were they entrepreneurial in spirit. So you'll be able to see all of those things reflected in the Family Foundation, and Joel will actually be able to talk about, I think, how maybe the founder of his organization, how you can still see that play out through their grant making. So, and the flexibility that staff and trustees have in their grant making is largely set out by the original donor and their donor intent and what kind of legacy they were hoping to leave. And so you might have some family foundations that are actually pretty narrow and are pretty narrowly defined by that original donor intent, and others that allow for a little more flexibility, especially as they maybe saw that as other family members were coming on board to the foundation, they wanted to be able to embrace more values of the new trustees coming on board. Next, we've got corporate foundations and giving programs. So these we're talking about 2 separate parts of a corporate giving strategy. So there's a foundation, which is set up as a separate legal entity completely, and then giving programs are often operated still within the corporation, and they tend to do 2 different things, and most companies actually have both. So the foundation is largely used for the grant making within particular communities. And then the giving program is often where you see matching gifts, dollars for doers, those kinds of programs, maybe even giving that's done out of the retail areas of particular stores. They're 9% of Minnesota's grant makers, which I think puts them number 2. But they give most of Minnesota's grant dollars every year. And business values guide the giving decisions. Now this has actually changed quite a bit. There didn't used to be as much alignment between what the business does and what the foundation of the corporation used to fund. We're seeing much more alignment through that now. all the way down to the volunteer opportunities that are available to employees through the corporation. So for instance, when Target said, you know, the majority of our funding is now going to education, so that went down to their places where volunteers were able to make matching gifts, where they were able to donate their time. You see a lot of corporations that require board service on particular organizations for making grants. So just a lot more alignment between what the business does and where they're giving. We're seeing that much more now than in the past. For community and public foundations, so these are actually public charities, just like probably most of the organizations that you work with. So where private family and independent foundations and corporate foundations are required that 5% payout, community and public foundations are not. They're public charities, and they are so because they are publicly supported to benefit a specific community, population, or region. So much like your organizations, they're also fundraising. So the Minneapolis Foundation, the Lutheran Community Foundation, P-Fund, which serves LGBT communities. So they have both a mix of annual and endowed fund development. So they've got a variety of funds. They have their general fund where they can make grant making, where they can do their grant making, but the majority of the funding that comes from community foundations is done through donor advised funds. It's about 70 to 80% for some foundations of the funding that they do. And so these are people who maybe in lieu of starting a foundation, said, I don't want to deal with the hassle of creating another organization and hiring staff and doing all of that sort of stuff. So we're actually going to put our money with this community foundation and advise them on where we'd like the money to go. Ultimately, that decision is up to the community foundation, but they really want to keep their donors happy, so they'll pretty much give the money to where the donor says it will go. You will not know who the donor advisors are. You will not know who they fund. Community foundations are very much right now set up to serve the donor. So you can't really search for who these people are and what their priorities are. So for if you're going to be writing a grant to a community foundation, you're most likely writing that grant for the unrestricted fund that they have. But still, the values and priorities of the community do guide the decisions. So, of course, the Minneapolis Foundation was first on the floor when the tornado hit in North Minneapolis. You see a lot of responsive community grant making from these kinds of organizations. So, so this is just a comparison. I think it's a nice shot of the comparison of, so the share of grant makers, so by far private, there's more private grant makers than the other two by far, but corporate really leads the way. And we've had quite a growth in the corporate fundraising, or the corporate giving within the last 10 years or so. We've seen big strides by groups like the Cargill companies, Medtronic, United Health. So those are really leading the way. So that's what I've got on the different types. Do you have any questions right now on the different types of foundations, who they are, what they care about? Yes?
Okay, so in your community and public foundations,
Yeah.
you said something like these serve the donor. You echoed that phrase.
Yeah.
But I'm having trouble picturing what sort of foundation that would be. Because I think of a donor as someone who's giving money to a separate cause.
Right. So the donor is giving money to the foundation. They're setting up sort of like a fund where they're going to advise the community foundation to say, here's where I would like this money to go, And so, and they're doing that because then it's easier for that foundation to be able to manage the transfer of that funds, rather than the individual try to set up a foundation or maybe in lieu of their own personal giving to do it themselves. So they're putting that, that back in the hands of the community foundation in order to do that for them. So eventually that money does go then to an organization, maybe much like your own, to ultimate, you know, they'll ultimately have the money.
What you end up seeing is that community foundations, as one of these entities, right? Community foundations tend to be kind of bifurcated.
Yep.
So they'll have their undesignated dollars going to sort of very public and defined things like tornado response, or in the case of Minneapolis, you know, immigration
Yep.
stuff, or St. Paul just launched a $1 million kind of Make St. Paul Great idea campaign. So they'll have these big initiatives, and then you'll have actually way more money going out through these donor advised funds to a bazillion causes that the donors care about. So it's their high schools, their colleges,
Right.
all the stuff that individuals tend to give to, that's what they give to through their.
So I just wanted to show you too, so over the last 10 years or so, that a large part of the change in the increase in funding has come from these companies that have joined the top 10 grant makers. So, I mean, if you look at the list, Target, General Mills, Cargill, United Health, Medtronic, US Bancorp, so 6 out of the top 10 are corporate funders. Okay, and what do funders fund? For the large part, most grants actually go to education. And sometimes it's human services. Actually, during the recession, it flipped, and more funders were actually funding human services than they were education. But for the most part, education and human services stay at the top. And human services is like all-encompassing. Human services is like, well, probably most, I'm not sure what all of your organizations are in the room, but, you know, domestic violence, workforce, all of that stuff, all goes in human services. Public affairs and society benefit are like volunteerism organizations. There also is like a little public policy in there, but there's also like federated funds like the United Way, all fit in there too. Arts and culture actually had a big jump in giving in the last year, and they had seen actually a big decrease, and so there's actually been much more corporate funding going to the arts. Health in Minnesota is actually a little lower than the national average because we have nonprofit healthcare providers, or nonprofit healthcare providers here. So their ability to give isn't as high as maybe some healthcare providers nationally. But this is pretty much the breakdown that happens every year. Yeah, go ahead.
Where does recreation fit in that?
That's in human services.
Okay.
Yeah. So that human services bucket, even though it's the second second category there, I mean, there's just a ton of organizations that fit in that category. So it's not a lot actually going for the individual organizations. Also, the greatest type of support is program support. So this is your applying for a specific program. So we want to increase the number of people we are serving through this program that does XYZ thing, and we have these goals in this program. General operating support is like keeping the lights on, buying your supplies, all of those kinds of things. Capital support goes to buildings, equipment, those kinds of things. And then student aid funds also. I'm not really sure what's included in other. So why do you think funders are interested in program grants, offering program support?
There's outcomes.
Oh, yeah. Okay, outcomes. Yep. So, is that what you were going to say? Somebody else? Yep. Yeah. Yeah, because it's sort of easier for funders to say, this is what our funding is doing out in the world. when it's tied to program support. Okay, so what we're going to do really quickly, we're going to create a nonprofit that we're going to research. We're going to do a little research for a nonprofit on some funders. So we need to create a nonprofit that provides employment and job training services in the Twin Cities. So what should we? Yeah, write this down. What should we name this nonprofit? Nonprofit that does employment and job training. What do you want to call it?
Goodwill. Oh, that's taken.
No, that's different. Yeah. Something involving work or
Career services.
career services.
Sounds like an
Else
office
in it.
function.
Oh, that's good. Anybody want to build on career services?
What if we do the number 4 and then higher?
Ooh,
Or higher.
or higher. Colon, career services. Or higher, all right. So what's the mission of For Hire? What do we want the, what is, so a mission is what good for whom? So what good is For Hire trying to do and for who, what people? Any thoughts? Yeah.
It's trying to help people who are currently unemployed get back into the workforce quickly. And I guess we can qualify quickly as 2 years.
Okay, all right, so getting people back into the workforce. And so what it sounds like, so we're targeting people who were previously unemployed, who want to get back in the workforce.
I'm just gonna say this because it will help later. Health.
Yep.
Back to work fast.
That, great.
2 years.
So then what kind of activities then would this sort of nonprofit offer? What would they do?
Resume workshops?
Resume workshops, what,
Mock interviews?
training, mock interviews?
Language classes.
So,
Language classes.
language classes,
Job searches?
job searches,
Money for certificate programs.
money for certificate programs. Great, that's a good list. So, what about geography? Should we just say Twin Cities in general? Do you want to say Minneapolis? Do you want to?
This could be a fight.
I know, okay. Oh, we're in St. Paul, aren't we?
East
West side.
Why do we say Twin Cities?
Twin Cities.
We'll say Twin Cities. We're equal opportunity. Okay. So now I'm new at For Hire. So what am I going to do as I'm starting on my grant maker research? So I need, before I even can begin to look for grant makers, I really need to know about my organization. I want a clear sense of who we are, what we do, and the community that we serve. I want to know where we're going and everything that we provide and how those things that we provide relate to the community. I want to know that we have some sort of plan in order to help the community and to reach our vision. And I want to know how much we think that it costs to do those things. So as I'm doing this, I'm going through our old annual reports. I'm looking at our website. I am reading our strategic plan, any of our marketing materials, what we say, how we represent ourselves. And probably from there I'm coming up with a keyword search, or a list of keywords that I can use in a search as I'm searching for funders. And so these are maybe also too some of the questions that I'm asking myself. So what's going on within our organization and in our community that we need help with? what have we done in the past? What do we have a good track record of doing that we can demonstrate to funders? And what is it that we're trying to do to meet future needs? And do we see in the community, both for the community and for ourselves, short-term and long-term needs? I don't have a slide on this, but what I would suggest doing is a SWOT analysis. Have you guys heard of SWOT? So it's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
Don't mess that
No,
up.
what? Oh. We need a whole nother sheet for
I'll do it
SWOT
over here,
analysis.
I'll do it.
Okay, you do it. All right. So strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats. So strengths and weaknesses, you're actually looking internally at your organization. So what are we good at? Where are our strengths? That's both in terms of your organizational infrastructure, your programs that you provide, etc. Opportunities and threats are those things that exist externally or outside of your control. They're outside of your organization. So is there particular legislation that's coming up that we need to be aware of? Is there a policy that's being discussed? So is there sort of a key moment that we can capitalize on? But also, are there threats too? Are there similar to those things? Are those things threatening the work and what we do? Are we seeing increased competition in our area, and so that we need to be aware of? So in understanding your org, you can do something like that really helps you give a good sense and a good understanding of who you are and what you do. So where do I begin? So now I really know who I am. I've come up with this list of keywords. I've done my SWOT analysis. So I'm probably going to start with a searchable database or a grant directory. I'm going to come up with a big list of funders, and then I'm going to try to whittle it down from there. So I'm going to start with these databases. Then I'm also going to look at local newspapers and newsletters and publications, professional journals. So because they're going to do a lot of research on who's funding what and in my area. So I'm going to look at workforce journals and employment journals in this case. Donor lists from similar organizations. I'm going to go to the website of the people who we partner with and the people we compete with and say who's funding them. And I'm going to create a list from there. At the same time, I'm going to talk with my colleagues. So who have you heard that's funding this similar kind of work? Who do you know of? And then once I kind of have narrowed down my list a little more, I'm going to go to the Grantmaker websites and annual reports. I'm going to see who they've funded in the past, and I'm going to make sure we're a really good fit. Also, if I'm feeling really nerdy, I'm going to go to the 990 forum. I'm going to see what's happening with their assets, what their financial, of the foundation, what their finances have been doing, how much they've funded, and kind of what we can expect possibly from funding in the coming years. So what do I want to know about grant makers? So as I'm looking at a database, I'm looking at their website, I'm looking at all of these other materials. So I want to know how they want to be contacted. Is it by phone? Is it by email? Is it by letter of inquiry? Like how, all of those different ways. Because, I mean, unfortunately that can be pretty important, and you can not start out on the right foot if you're not contacting the grant maker in the right way. Does the grant maker accept unsolicited proposals in this area? Not all grant makers accept unsolicited proposals. So that means, so they will invite your organization to submit a proposal. So we'll see when we talk about J. Rose Phillips Family Foundation and kind of what they, how they approach that as well. And so you have an understanding if the grant maker is even willing to be approached by you. And then the main focus after I know some of these things are the grant guidelines. So the grant maker mission, their funding priorities, and if there are any limitations to the funding, like the kinds of organizations that they fund. So maybe they fund education, but they don't fund schools or something like that. Geographic focus, and if there are any limitations in focus, if there are any particular neighborhoods or something like that. Types of support, that program support, capital support, general operating, what kind of support do they give? Subject areas of interest, and then intended beneficiaries too. Are we serving the same people? So, grant maker guidelines, you read them once, you read them twice, you read them 3 times, you become very, very, very familiar with what the grant maker is trying to to make sure that you're the best fit. Okay, also, we're looking at past grants. You know, I'm looking at past grants not only to know who else this funder is funding, but how much they fund to organizations that are like mine. And you know, I might also learn a little bit about then the average grant size as well. So the financial information, how much the grant maker is able to give, I'll find some of that information on the 990. There's usually a lot of information on application information, so how do I properly apply for grants? There might be several steps in a process. It might start with a letter of inquiry and then go to a proposal. And then staff and trustees. So who's guiding the work, and you know, why are they there? Are they a family foundation, and so is it going to be family members? Does anybody I know these people, and can we help make those connections for them then? So searchable databases. So starting back at the top of our list. So these are typically subscription-based. You find many grant makers in one place. This often enables the discovery of new grant makers that maybe you haven't heard of. And they're set up in a way that all of the information is then presented all in the same place. So here we've got the snapshot of 3M, but we'll do a search and we'll actually see what grant makers you can find in a little bit. And I'll show you how that works. You can typically search for grant makers, and you can also search for past grants. So if you know the name of an organization that you'd like to see who else has funded them, you can search to see if which funders have given to that particular organization. So we'll look at a couple of those things. There are a couple other databases out there besides the one that I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you Minnesota Grant Makers Online, which is the product of Minnesota Council of Foundations. But the other one that you should probably know about is Foundation Directory Online, which is the national grant maker database. So that's going to include funders from all over the country. But it does only typically include the top funders, so you're not going to find a lot of those smaller family foundations. You also, I think, have to search for corporate grant makers separately, so they're not going to come in your list, everybody all together. But
you can access it for free at a certain public library.
Well,
But you can do it.
such as these.
Oh, MGO too, really?
MGO2,
Oh,
yes.
okay.
So, all NGO and Foundation Directory Online are all available for free at these libraries. Which is a great service. I know that I was at an organization where we didn't have the subscription, and so I went to the Hennepin County Library quite a bit. So I would suggest that.
I remember the books.
Oh yes,
Before
there
they
used to be
had
books. So the grant maker web pages. So I've gone through the database, I've got all this information. I'm gonna then go to the grant maker web page, because that's probably most likely where I'm gonna apply for grants. More and more grant makers are moving to online applications, which has its pros and cons. There's usually character limits, so you might have written this beautiful piece, and then you found out that you have 200 extra words, and you need to find out how you're going to cut that down. Yeah?
And those donor advised funds aren't required to be disclosed in an annual report or anything like that? That can be completely
Yeah,
not
no.
transparent?
Nope. Yep. I think the only thing they have to report is total giving done through donor advised funds. But you can create a donor advised fund and remain completely anonymous. Yeah. So, so what you can do though too is, particularly with family foundations, sometimes families set up foundations and they also have donor advised funds. So if you do receive a grant from a family foundation and you have a good relationship with that foundation, you might be able to ask if they have a donor advised fund, or vice versa if you've received, but you might need to even know who the donor advisor is if you've received a check. There's no way to tell who they are. So, yeah. Any other questions about this before we?
Do when counties give grants or other government entities, is that in the public and community category? Or is
No,
that
so
totally
that's
separate?
a whole separate
Okay.
category. Yeah, so right now we're really talking about private philanthropy.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just to put it in context, I mean, it varies by field, but, government spending on any social service kind of endeavor is usually hugely larger than private spending.
Yeah.
I tend to work in the workforce and employment services universe, and in our field, we did some research showed that 95% of the money comes from the government, 5% comes from private philanthropy.
Okay, so what do funders fund and how much are they funding and all that kind of stuff. So this is the total look at private funding that Minnesotans gave in 2010. You'll see that foundation funding is about 27% of total private funding. This looks like this and has looked like this forever. This has not changed. The majority of private funding for nonprofit organizations comes from individuals. This really reflects the national picture, but the corporate funding nationally is actually a little smaller. We have great corporate representation here in Minnesota. So across the board, 75% of private funding, for the most part, comes from individuals. But Minnesotans are pretty generous. We rank 21st in population in the country, but we're usually within somewhere in the top 10 or 15 of giving per capita. So this is both from individuals and from foundations. So grant making has actually increased quite a bit over the last decade. You'll see some dips in here that we'll also talk about when we talk about assets of foundations. But for the large part, we had a ton of growth happen over the last 10 years. What you see too, if you pay attention to these sort of latter years, there's a little spike and then there's some leveling off. And this leveling off is kind of what the Minnesota Council on Foundations at least is predicting as the new trend, that we're not going to be seeing a ton of growth in foundation grants in the next couple of years. So when you think about that and you think about your grant seeking, then think about that environment that has been created, that there is less grant making happening, probably more need for grants, and that we're not going to see a ton of growth at least in these next couple of years. So you can see sort of that giving is very closely tied to assets over time. So you see big losses here. So this is after 9/11 here in that first recession. And then this is the recession that we just experienced in the last couple of years. So that number is actually only, I think it's like an 11 or 12% drop in assets. So the Margaret A. Cargill Foundation, have you guys heard of that foundation yet? Yeah? So it's going to be like the 5th largest foundation in the country. It is the largest foundation here by far. I think it's like twice the size of the McKnight Foundation, which used to be the largest foundation. Their assets were realized in that year. If their assets had not been realized that year, there would have been a 30% drop in assets.
In 2008.
In 2008, yeah. So, and Margaret A. Cargill isn't yet doing all of its funding yet, and so we're not quite back up to those levels that we enjoyed prior to 2006. So, oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I am not very financial savvy.
Yes.
What does it mean when your assets are realized?
Oh, sure. So Margaret A. Cargill, she passed away and left her the remainder of her assets that were actually tied to stock in the Cargill company. So they had to do all of this negotiating so that the company was still okay, because she owned a large part of their stock actually. In order for her to fully realize those assets that could be placed in the foundation. So they got a hold of a large majority of their assets at their time, and I think they're actually still gaining some of their assets here. I don't think they
Yeah,
actually
it's so much money that they can't pull it out of Cargill all in one
all in
shot.
one shot.
So they're
Yeah.
gradually selling their Cargill stock and then putting that money into the foundation. So the foundation is gonna grow to be multiple billions of dollars
Yeah.
over this next 10 years.
Yeah. But the large part of their endowment was created in that year. So also, I'll show you what, we're gonna go to the Jane Rose Phillips Family Foundation page in a second, and I'm gonna show you, so what other places on the website that I'm gonna go other than the grant guidelines. And then the 990 form. So available for free on GuideStar. You can set up an account on GuideStar for free. And so not only does it contain the financial information for the foundation, it also, in their attachments 18 and 19, they need to list all of the grantees of the prior year. And so that's just another place to get a sense of what foundations have funded. So you're going to use the databases and directories to make a long list of prospects, study the prospects for those limitations, giving patterns, geography and focus, read the guidelines multiple times, and then you're going to contact the best prospects. So funders want to know that you have done your research, that you know all of this ahead of time, that you're not going to call them and ask, so when is the proposal due? And how many pages does it need to be? You know all of that. So what they want to hear from you is, what idea do you have to meet this mutual need that we're trying to meet? So and Joel can talk a little bit more about that too. I'll give you a long list of things we need to talk about, Joel. But we're also going to see when we go to the Jan Rose Phillips site, for instance, is that there's lots of ways to solicit proposals from grantees. There can be this pre-proposal process like I talked about. There's a letter of inquiry, which is maybe like a page or two that's sort of like, hey, you might not know us, so here's a little bit about us. Here's an idea that we have. If you'd like us to tell you more, we'd love to submit an application. There's also responsive ways of soliciting proposals. So you might have open requests for proposals. There is also I'm going to show you another page in a second. It's like they just have open deadlines. So the arts program at the Butler Family Foundation always accepts proposals in June, and so you just know that, and that's the way they're being responsive to the needs of the community. So competitive. So there's an RFP. There might be a specific number or type of organizations, and then pre-selected too. So they're invited by the foundation based on whatever criteria the foundation has established, and they will invite you to submit proposals. There are some ways to, like you'll see with the Jane Rose Phillips site, that even if they don't accept unsolicited proposals, they might still accept a letter of inquiry. So I've just logged into my account on Minnesota Grantmakers Online, and so this is what it looks like. And you can see here, so not only does it have the different ways that I can search, but there might also be information on other opportunities that are out there that I might be interested in, and also these upcoming deadlines. So this is what I was just referring to, the open grant deadlines. If you go to the Minnesota Council on Foundations page and there's a button for nonprofits, then you find the grant guidelines under that, and you'll see for the entire year all of the funder deadlines that are due. So these are those open proposal opportunities. So the Fred C. and Catherine B. Anderson Foundation, their proposal deadline is March 11th. So this is one of those pages you just want to scroll through and be aware of all of those deadlines, particularly if there's a funder that you've heard of before that you're just interested in knowing more about. Okay, so we're going to search for grant makers using this this nonprofit that we've created. So if you know the funder you're looking for, you can just type in the name and they'll pop up. But we're going to do an advanced search because we sort of want to get kind of a broader area of interest, broader list of funders that we can choose from. So, so you can pull it up by grant maker name, but I'm first going to go to area of interest. And I know that we're looking at employment and jobs. So because I'm trying to create a broad list right now, I'm just going to click this top one here, employment and jobs. I could also go to each of these individually and click on those, but I'm going to keep my search broad for now. And so they're all going to pop up there. You know, another thing we decided is that, you know, this is located in the Twin Cities. So I'm going to click Twin Cities metropolitan area. We didn't talk about types of support, so I'm not going to go through that now. So, and I don't want to quite narrow my search yet on grant maker type either, because I'm just looking for this big broad list. So I'm going to click search. And we've got 27 grant makers that are listed as funding employment and jobs in the Twin Cities. So I'm gonna do a little search. And I'm like, okay, look, here are the assets here. You can get a sense of that, and the grants paid. Now these are total grants paid. These are not just grants paid in employment. So I'm not sure yet how much grants are done just in the employment area. But let's see, I'm going to go over here. Oh, Jane Rose Phillips Family Foundation. Interesting. I wonder who they are. So, so right away I see up at the top, they've got their contact information and everything. And right here, right away, are the guidelines. So I know their mission right here in employment, helping low-income individuals advance towards stable, livable wage careers. Oh, you know, that sounds like something that we would fit in because we're trying to help unemployed adults get back to work fast. They're also focused in the Twin Cities. I see that there's a lot of other things that they fund in these various areas of interest. Okay, and these intended beneficiaries, adults, good, because we're serving adults. And there's all these various different types of support. So I can go to them for general operating, also management and technical assistance, so if there's other things that we need assistance with in our organization, and also program development and project support. So, oh, it looks like they're particularly interested in public policy research and analysis. So, let's say I've looked through all of these funders, all of these 27 funders, and I think Jane Rose Phillips Foundation is a really good fit. So I'm going to go to their website. I'm going to go to several places. I'm going to go to their mission and vision and read about their mission. I'm going to go to the foundation history. Who are Jay and Rose? What did they care about? Who are they? I'm going to also go to their annual reports, and I think I have one open right here. Yep. So this is their 2011 annual report. So I'm going to read this thing like crazy. I want to know what they fund. Oh look, they have a sectoral initiative or employment initiative. That's really interesting. Maybe I want to know more about that. Their grants list. Cool. So I can see who they funded in 2011, how much they fund, what kind of funding. It's all right here.
Phillips Foundation. What's up with that?
Oh, and here more on their financials. Great. Cool. So that's awesome. That's all right here. Is there anything else I want to do on their... Oh, well, and obviously I'm going to go to their funding priorities and their application procedures. So they've got 4 strategies. One of them is employment. I'm really interested in that. So I'm going to read all this like crazy. And as I'm looking here, I'm seeing, oh, okay. So they're only going to invite proposals for the most part. But if I've got a program that I feel fits, I can fill out an LOI. So they won't accept unsolicited proposals, but I do have the opportunity to contact them if I wish. So the other place that I'm going to go to, I'm going to go to GuideStar, and I'm going to pull up their 990. I'm going to look at a couple of things. So the grants paid in 2011, $3 million it looks like, and if I, back over, where was it? Back over here, financial information. Yep, so that's the same number. So okay, so I know the information here over on MGO is really still relevant. The other thing, 990s are very dense, lots of financial information. The other place I would maybe go at this point is looking at what their assets did in the last couple of years to understand the effect that the recession had on their assets. So, so you can see the year here. This was their grants paid. So I can see they did the highest amount of grant making in 2009, and their grants have dipped a little bit. And so in 2011, it was a little over 3 million. So I can see that they haven't gotten back up there quite yet. And so I can see what their assets did. At their height, they were at 70 million. And at this point, they're now just back up at 58. So one of my questions I would have for Joel, if I was talking with him, I would maybe say, okay, I think I'm a really good fit for your foundation, but what's the appetite right now of your foundation of taking on new grantees? Is this a highly competitive environment? Should I honestly submit my information? So, okay, at this point, we're going to turn it over to Joel, who's going to come in and talk about things. I don't know, did we schedule time for a break or anything else? Or do you guys need a break? Do you want a break? No? No? Okay.
Just any questions?
Yeah, any other
About
questions?
Yeah.
Quick question. So the website of Minnesota Council of Nonprofit, you can access the library.
Oh, yes, so the MGO, so this thing that I showed you here, this, Minnesota Grantmakers Online, this you can access for free at the library.
So if you have to physically go to the library, or you can log in.
No, you have to physically go to the library, unfortunately, because there's usually like 2 or 3 computers that they have that are set up to have this, like, subscribe to this database. But,
This is a money-making product
It
for
is.
Minnesota Council on Foundation, so they're not going to set it up so that it's public access for free from anywhere.
right. So initial contact either by telephone or email, they say, that I can reach out to them. I would say in either case, like I said before, I have done my homework. I'm not coming in with the, do you accept unsolicited proposals? Because I know that they don't. So that's not my question, I'm coming, having done my homework with a really solid idea that I'm going to reach out to Joel to. Also, if they allow me to contact them by phone or email, I'm going to contact them. If they're gonna put their contact information out there, to me that says they actually want to hear from me. So I know some people are sort of wary about should I actually contact a funder? And yes, absolutely, I would contact a funder. But you'll talk more about that too, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
So my job at the Phillips Foundation is senior program officer, which I think is hilarious because there's no other program officer, so just whatever. A program officer, that's, I guess, the common job title that people like me hold, basically is a gatekeeper in a way and a prospect researcher for the foundation. So it's our job to find the investment opportunities that are going to take the foundation's resources and put them to the most good in the community. Sometimes program officers have really specific interests. Their whole world is, early childhood, or their whole world is, one even scientific endeavor, ecology or whatever. But I think in this town, it's more often the case that program officers tend to be more generalists. So don't think like you have to have expert level knowledge on even the work that you're doing. You don't need to come in with all the recent academic articles read and so on, because most of us haven't read those either. So. And just personally, some people are curious, how do you get into this job?
Yeah.
And I did the National Service Program actually for two years. I was Lutheran Volunteer Corps, and went to work at Lutheran Social Service doing refugee resettlement. And I did refugee resettlement for 11 years. And in that the time span, I went to graduate school and got a public administration degree, not from Humphrey, but when I
I'm a Humphrey grad.
left town and came back. And then was in management for a while, and I just kind of realized that I wanted to do this work, and I had no plan, like how I was gonna sort of weasel my way into it, but I ended up applying for a job at Phillips when they had a job, and my hunch is that they were so confused about the immigrant organizations that were applying for funding for them. It was about 25% of their payout, their grants were going to immigrant organizations. They were so confused about that, they really liked the idea of somebody coming in who knew that field really well and could sort of help them sort out who were the legitimate organizations and who weren't, and how do you reach the whole community if there's 10 organizations that claim to represent it, and so on. So anyway, and I've been at the foundation for 6 years. Okay, so I want to dig a little deeper into our website. Every foundation's website obviously is very different, but I think there are some ways in which our website demonstrates the way foundations give you hints about how they're working. Because some foundations, as Steph said, are highly specific and have put a ton of effort into figuring out what they're going to fund, and some foundations have had the same guidelines forever, and they just sort of keep the door open and wait for good ideas to come in. And neither way is wrong, but you can tell from the website what kind of foundation they are. So let's go to, the first thing you can know about our foundation is that some people are dying. So we have 2 memorials of former trustees.
We're in here.
Let's go to mission and vision. I think that's, tends to be from the nonprofit world, like, does our mission and your mission align? And, are we looking at the world the same way? And I don't think our mission statement is atypical in that it doesn't tell you anything helpful. Poverty Law found legacy of its founders by supporting efforts to address the unmet human and social needs of individuals, families, and communities. I mean, come on, what doesn't fit that? And I'll even say if you read through the envision part, it's not very helpful either. So you can say, okay, well, you want to help people, and I guess poor people, there's sort of an implication where about helping people in poverty, but it's not very specific. So then, to get a little clearer, you really need to go to this funding priorities and application procedures part of the foundation. And this is where you start to really typically get a much richer flavor of what they're all about. And right away at the beginning, you go down, yeah, no, sorry, go to the top. You'll see Twin Cities grant making, so you can know we've got some kind of geographic focus, and if you read through the whole website, you'll see it's really our only focus is the Twin Cities. But in the second line, you get a much more specific sense of what we're about today. I'll say that mission statement that we read has probably been around almost unchanged since the foundation was created, like 22 years ago. But this document, this page tells you what we think today, which is we want to concentrate our grant making on efforts to help people living in poverty attain economic stability.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So how has that evolved? Has it been because of trustees? Has it been kind of changed to
Right.
help shape the direction? Is that staff?
Well, yeah, every especially family foundations, the evolution is this interesting, from the outside, sometimes maddening from the inside, mix of rational decision making and then families not getting along or getting along. Families never get along all the time. Hopefully they don't not get along all the time either. So, yeah, that's the story of our foundation too. We used to be a very broad and general foundation, and we did grant making here and in 2 other states. And over the years, the Minnesota part of the family and the families, the branches of the families in those other states kind of grew apart, and they had different ideas about what the foundation should be about. And it kind of came to a head in 2010, and they just made the decision we're going to split up the foundation. So we went from being a $180 million foundation in 3 states to being a $60 million foundation in Minnesota. And there's 2 other foundations that exist out there, totally independent of us. So when we went through this kind of schism, that's when we had a chance, this was the silver lining on that, that's when we had a chance to really rethink, what are we about? How do we want to do our work? What do we want to focus on? And that's frankly when we decided we're tired of, not to say grant writing isn't important, but we're tired of reading 400 grant proposals a year. We just want to read proposals about stuff that we're really interested in. Not basically 400 proposals a year means you're reading 250 proposals that you're not interested in at all, and 150 proposals that you are interested in. That had been our experience. So we just said we want to focus more on what we're really interested in, take the time to figure out what we're interested in, and then, you know, work with the smaller universe of organizations in that area. So, and already in this funding priorities, if you scroll down, you'll see we're spending 3 paragraphs to tell you what we think poverty means. To me, and I think if you compare this to many other foundations, especially foundations of our size, $60 million endowment or so, we're giving you way more content than many foundations would. So that's telling you we've got pretty specific ideas about what we want to see. Foundations that don't tell you all this stuff probably are a lot more open to, you know, whatever ideas are bubbling up in the community. And then we get to the 4 strategies, and for this one, for soon-to-be famous for hire organization, employment is the obvious fit. So let's click on that. And here we go again. I have written, because I wrote all this, you know, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 paragraphs that just introduce the topic of employment. And if you read through all this, I think you really do get a sense of like, why did we pick this topic? What's our kind of take on the employment challenges that people face today? And then you'll start to see, if you scroll down, the ways that we have structured our grant making. So first thing, and I guess you could assume the first thing on the list is typically the most important thing, is what we call the Sectoral Employment Initiative. And if you click here, this is the typical RFP model, which is more often used by government. So government would tend to put out an RFP where they spend a lot of time explaining the problem they're trying to solve and who they want to work with to solve it. And even on the government side, they might say a lot about exactly what you as an applicant need to do with our money. Foundations don't use this tool as much because it's super time intensive. And often foundations, you know, I'm speaking broadly about the field, they don't spend the time to dig into the issues they're working on to figure out exactly what a smart solution would be, or, you know, if they want to be more directive with that. So we don't need to read through this whole thing, but I'll just tell you it's like 11 pages long, again, that I wrote to explain why we're doing this project. So it's, it indicates a pretty high level of engagement with the subject matter. So you would know, as for hire, there's a pretty high bar, right? You're going to be talking to a foundation that's really honed in on this, as they're talking about stuff from a place of some knowledge and experience, and you're going to want to reference as much as possible stuff that they're funding. That's going to be a strong indication of what they're interested in the future. Okay, so you can go back. We don't need to read through that whole god-awful thing. But then there are these other funding categories about partnering with vocational education and advocacy for employment success of diverse communities, which don't have RFPs, and we say here that the foundation will invite proposals from selected organizations. So you can't exactly send us a proposal, but these are areas where this LOI vehicle is what we're using to give people a chance to kind of pitch ideas to us. Questions about any of this so far? So let's go back to the home page one more time. And I'll just point out a couple of things that we put on there that I think are also really helpful. And, looking through this website actually, again, first thing, yeah, we need to update it. But it points out to me that we haven't made some kind of key bits of advice as obvious as we should. So if you go to frequently asked questions, for example, you have to come to this document and find your way down, go down to, if our organization does work that we think might fit. Where's that one? I guess you can scroll up to that. If our organization does work that might fit, what should we do? And it's really, this is the only place that I can find where we kind of clearly say, actually, we really kind of want you to call us. You can do the LOIs and all that, but give us a call. I think we do actually see this somewhere else, but it's not as obvious as it probably should be. That we say, like, we're open to just taking your call and talking it over. And frankly, an LOI, even though it's short, it's still going to, if you give it the attention you should, it's going to take you a few hours to do, so half an hour phone call is going to save you that effort if it's sort of an obvious mismatch. So then the last thing I'll show you, and then maybe we can do a little sort of role play, is the search function.
This one?
Yeah. So, you could find most of this, I think, through the online databases. We may have stuff here that's 1 year more current because we're inputting our own information and not sort of waiting for somebody else to upload it into a third-party database. And not all foundations have this capability on their website, but it is really helpful to get kind of the freshest take on whether they're currently funding stuff that is like what you're doing. So, I mean, hypothetically, if you all have probably a slightly different idea of what For Hire is all about, but I mean, can you think of an organization that would be a peer in that field and you'd want to search to see if we had funded them?
Hired.
Hired. So let's look for Hired. Yeah, so, okay. We like Hired. We gave them 75,000 each of the last 2 years because they're part of our sector employment initiative. So these are like our bosom buddies. This is our inner circle. What did they used to go? Wasn't there a phone company where you had like your five?
Yes.
Oh.
What was that?
I don't know what that was.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're in there. So, if you've done research on the way Hired's doing its work and you're kind of like intentionally complimenting something that they do, that'd be great. That would be like a really smart reference point if you're having a conversation with me. Or you want to think of another? Yeah.
How do you show that you've done your research? Like, to what extent do you address, so I see that you're like Hired and we also do some of the same, like how much are you supposed to be saying that?
Well, I think it's, for a foundation like us that has really pretty tightly defined what we're interested in, I think that the approach is that you're doing something that is not present or not sufficiently present in that field of work, and so you're complementing sort of the known players there. So if you were to say, like, if you were to look at our sectoral employment initiative and what it's all about, you might say, you guys have really honed in on healthcare as a key sector and manufacturing and construction, but we've got a project that's, For Hire is working in telecommunications. And we're seeing a lot of people who've been laid off in that industry, and we're helping them retrain to be cable installers or whatever. You know, so that would be like, oh, so I know you're thinking about this work in the way that I think about this work. And you're building off of, you're helping me understand new opportunities that sort of gradually, incrementally grow from what we're doing. Is that?
Do you ever like name drop other like organizations, or like when you're looking at the mission, how much are you brown nosing? You know, like we also really care. You know, like how much?
Well, no, I think it's one thing that's very true of most people who are in institutional giving. You know, whether that's foundations or United Way or I don't know what else there is in that universe. You tend to become jaded about new entrants into a field. Minnesota has an abundance of nonprofits. So there's always this kind of screen or thought that goes in your mind, is this an organization or should this be a program of another organization? So by referencing the current field, and especially the lead players in that field, you're making the case like, we deserve to exist. You know, we're here for a reason. We're not just doing the same thing they're doing. And especially if you're in alliance or in partnership with them, then you're even making a stronger case because you're saying, even the lead players or the known grantees that you have acknowledged that we do something that complements their work or that expands their work or is important to their work. So I think that name dropping is really good. Yeah. Yeah.
So then knowing what you know about the organizations that you're funding, if you have somebody come to you that you think should be a program of an organization rather than an organization, do you play any kind of role in facilitating partnership there because it might be in your interest?
That's a good question. You know, and I would tend to say typically no, because ego's involved and it feels presumptuous of me, even though I may think that, it feels presumptuous of me to sort of bluntly say, like, you really need to go talk to so-and-so about merging your work with theirs. You know, I think the soft version of that is you know, encouragement about alliances or partnerships. So we get a number of, I mean, I talk to a lot of people who are doing good work, but it's work that should, but they're not aware enough about the ecosystem that they're operating in. And I work in education and in workforce. I think it's probably, yeah, it's just true across the board. So that's where I might say, you know, I really, it sounds like you're doing good work. It sounds pretty similar to what Agency X and Agency Y are doing. So you might want to touch base with them or research them and then get back to me to help me understand how you're complementing and not duplicating that work. I mean, there also is, there's a resource for organizations that want to merge. Again, it's not going to be my place to tell somebody to do that.
Sure. And I guess a follow-up to that would be, are organizations or programs good at doing that or bad at doing that? And
They're terrible at doing
this resource that you were talking about.
They're terrible at doing that. I mean, I'll be honest, it's like, that still just confuses me. Because I don't understand why more organizations don't present collaborative proposals. And you sometimes see it in a sort of a vendoring kind of relationship where you have the grantee and then there'll be some organization that's going to get paid a little chunk of money or something. But you rarely see organizations coming forward with like a highly developed, synergistic idea. I don't understand. You know, coming out of the refugee world where so often we had a cultural knowledge or access to an immigrant population that a mainstream provider didn't have, but they had a kind of expertise or capacity in a service area that we didn't have, like housing or employment, health stuff. I mean, we had to make those connections. That was like our job, was to form those partnerships so that our clients could, so we could help our clients access mainstream resources.
I guess I have a question. When you said duplicating versus complementing,
Yeah.
would like, for example, if there's a program in North Minneapolis and I want to start a program really similar to that, but in like South Minneapolis, would you consider that complementing or duplicating? I'm sure it's like specifics, but.
Well, you'll find that in most types of human service work, the lead players have multiple sites. So they've often already made decisions about where to expand. And so it's not a great argument in my mind to say that my neighborhood is under-resourced in that area, because the expansion is not a difficult thing for Project for Pride Living or Salvation Army or whomever might be the big player. I do think that it's more compelling to look at it in the sense of like aggregate need. So like I couldn't say there's enough high-quality job training out there in the community. There isn't enough. People need access, especially if you're getting down to like a specific population. Like you say, ex-offenders need more. If you were to come to me and say, like, we want to serve ex-offenders and do this kind of training that's going to get them into felon-friendly jobs, there might be other people doing that, but that's a field where there's like way more need than there is service capacity.
What determines like how much money a lender or a foundation will give? Like, do they just say, hey, we're only going to give one person, we're going to give it all of them? Or
They could. Well, everybody's got their own style, and we're kind of hard to read, because even if you look at hired, you scroll down. So we've been giving hired $75,000, but then our last grant that was $11,000. So, I think if you did more digging of more nonprofits in this field, you'd see that we tend to land in the sort of $20,000 to $40,000 range. So if you're ballpark there, more than 10, less than, if your need is more than 10, less than, let's say 60, we probably, would feel like a good fit. You would feel like a good fit from a need standpoint. But there are foundations, maybe like McKnight or something, where if you came to them with a $20,000 ask, they might say, this is just too small for us. We only really want to work with organizations that can channel $150,000 or more or something. And we would say that to somebody who came to us looking for $1,000 bucks. They're like, well, we're just, the way we work, we're not looking to make a lot of $1,000 grants. So I think if you looked at 10 organizations that a foundation had funded in your field, just average it out, that would give you a totally accurate sense of that. So, do you want to sort of hypothetically have this little conversation about, what, calling as a representative for hire to me and seeing, how I would guide you through our funding system? And we don't need to single anybody out. We could do it as a group.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Ring, ring.
Okay, so sometimes I get called just out of the blue, and sometimes I get an email and then a follow-up call. I think to me, the calls are what I want to get to, but it doesn't hurt to have a previous email. So let's just say you were savvy about that and you made sure that I at least had an opportunity to learn a little bit about your organization, and then you called. not enough time on that after that. So, okay. I would say, this is Joel. How is it going? Phillips Family Foundation, this is Joel. I'm very loyal to the organization. So what do you think would be a good approach?
Hi, my name is and I'm calling from For Hire, that's right. That's how you would start.
And what are you calling about?
And we want to know how For Hire's mission lines up with the Jay and Rose Phillips Family Foundation position. Maybe.
Sure. I
We
mean,
said, no, we did our research, so we already know
Yes.
that.
yeah.
Yeah,
I think, you know, we get some flowery language sometimes from development directors and so on. And we know that this is about money, so I mean, it's really like, we've been looking at your website and we think we might be a fit for your funding interest, but we want to know more, so let's say you said that. And I said, okay. Well, tell me a little bit about, tell me why you think For Hire is a good fit with our interest in employment. And then you probably go with some of this stuff. Can anybody add to that? You guys work in employment. You can make up some BS about training and.
Well, so we have this program where we help ex-offender adults get into the construction field through resumes and mock interviews and extensive training and job search. And we think that our program would be a good fit for what you do. And we would love some funding for
And I might as well, like, how long have you guys been around, or are you just starting up?
We started today.
Literally.
And that's not unusual, right? You know, new organizations need money from somebody, but I think it's important, if you are new, to say, like, where else do you draw credibility from? So maybe it's that you have worked in the construction field for a long time and feel compelled to offer opportunities to these people, but that tells me you have an industry knowledge. Maybe you work for another nonprofit and see a need that they're not addressing. So you need to be real aware that there's a jadedness about new players, and it's important to explain the value you're adding to that field of work. So if you're new, let's just go back to the conversation. You know, what are your plans for the coming year? What would you want our funding to help you do?
We're hoping to start a program for 10 individuals and have them through the program employed within 18 months.
Have you been in the employment arena? This is where I would go. Have you been talking to employers about their need for these folks, and are they involved at all in your training program? Yeah, so you said that. I mean, and you know, hopefully you've done all this work ahead of time, but it's going to have to show up in the proposal if you get that far. So, you know, I think if we carried this on for a while and it felt to me like I wanted to learn more, I mean, that's kind of where I'm coming from, I want to know more about this, then I would encourage folks to submit a letter of inquiry, and for us, that's about a 2-page document. It's very short, but it gives you, it kind of is our test to see if you can succinctly make a case for yourself, and then from there, I would probably meet with you, and we'd have a deeper conversation about where you've come from, what your aims are, really get into the weeds of what you'd want to do with the funding and your ambitions. And there might be some back and forth that happens, over some weeks or even months, I guess, if I feel like, and this would especially be true, I think, in new organizations, like there's more connections you need to make or more information that I need. Especially when you're dealing with funders that are deeply engaged in an issue, they may have a lot of advice for you about how you could kind of beta test your idea, improve your idea, bounce it off of other people. So there could be some back and forth there before you get the kind of golden ticket for us, which would be an invitation to apply. And typically, when you're dealing with foundations that are, where the proposals are invitation only, once the proposal's been invited, there's a very high chance of being funded. You've set up this screen so that, in our case, it's so that, it's again, so that we're only looking at ideas that we think are really exciting. Now, there are other foundations that do invitation only because they have no staff support, and they just don't want to deal with all these foundations or these applications, and so they tend to be quite consistent in who they fund year after year. The trustees, the family, whatever, they just kind of go back to the alma mater, their church or whatever, and that's what the grants are. Yeah.
You talked a little bit about like the size of grants, but what if you overshoot and you ask for way too much money? Are you easily would you ever throw out a grant application because they want way too much money? Or would you try and award partial funding for it?
We would definitely throw out a grant application if they came in wildly off mark. And I guess it would be less about the fact that it's the wrong number and more about the fact that they don't have a clue about raising money. It would reduce our faith that they could raise that amount. Like if you came in and said, we need $800,000. Like, fine, you need $800,000. But then if you said, we need $800,000 and we're going to these 20 foundations and we already have 100 and this is our plan, that's a totally different kind of ask.
Yeah.
You could come in and say, if you had us pegged for 100,000, right, which is a very high number for us, but you had lots of other funding prospects on your little kind of draft budget, and that tells me you're a little more realistic than the occasional request we get where people just like, it's $1 million idea, you got $1 million? It's pretty rare that that's going to work. Yeah.
It's a little bit unrelated, but do you have a sense for all this talk about pay for performance granting? Is that everyone's moving that direction? Just the big foundations that are interested in that?
Yeah, I'm not. I haven't been deeply engaged in that. If you're familiar with this, it's more prevalent in some fields than others, and it's certainly very prevalent idea in employment, where government or major private funders, in this town it's United Way that's leading the charge, are thinking about funding schemes that pay people either more based on the outcomes they're achieving, so that's the kind of old-fashioned pay for performance. We'll give you X amount of money for every person you place. The new version of pay for performance is we'll pay you based on how much societal benefit your services achieve. And in order to calculate that societal benefit, what the funder is saying is, we will track it. We will track it based on very deep mining of data on your participants. Whether they're going back to prison, whether they're using Medicaid, whether they're earning wages and how much they're paying in taxes. And we'll either do that on the participant level, like we'll actually require you to be part of a super rigorous evaluation system. Or sometimes you'll find funders that will say, like, we will reward you based on averages that have been sort of verified by other research. And there's a whole nother, as you continue down this line, gets to the point where it's not even just about paying based on societal benefit, but then there's this other level of it where people are creating financial products, bonds, which are being sold on the commercial bond market, and the whole value of the bond is government savings, and the government is sort of guaranteeing the money. It's crazy, it's very sophisticated. My hunch is you will not see that highly kind of quantitative, ROI, return on investment approach permeate all of philanthropy. I think you see that you'll see it in government. It may become very prevalent in government, and you may see some funders latch onto it. But many of the rest of us, I think, are, come at this firstly from a mission and value standpoint. And when we have an endowment, we're not obligated, or we're not as compelled to sort of prove the return on the investment to anybody. I mean, if the trustees feel good about what we're giving money to, and we have pretty good confidence that it's having good results, that's enough. That's like a level of proof we are happy with. But government may be like, well, the taxpayers, need to know that the money that we're using is actually definitively based on hardest of hard evidence, being efficiently spent. That's just a different standard of proof. And then there's also a lot of funders that fund things like, anti-discrimination work, public policy work, social change work that's very amorphous, and so it doesn't really fit into the, you can't put it into an equation.
I have a question
Yep.
about corporate funders, and how much what they fund, I guess, is used for PR and how that aligns, and what kind of considerations come into that.
Well, I don't think you'd ever want to, pose that question exactly that way to them, because there's even if they're very tightly aligning giving to core business activities, they don't want to claim that it's PR, even though, obviously that's a part of the reason. But I think, as Steph said, that's clearly the trend in my mind. It's jaded, but it's also a virtuous cycle, right? So it's not like people are being harmed by that, but there's a very savvy calculation they're making.
You'll hear corporations talk about it as corporate social responsibility, shared value. So, which is the nice way of, or the answer to your question. It's sort of like the way that they see the alignment between their giving and what they do.
I don't think it's ever a bad idea, though, to go to a company with an idea you think actually will reflect well back on them. So you'd be like, we're going to do this community fair, and it's going to be whatever. It's, like I'm thinking about dragon boat races, right? Which are kind of a fun thing, a lake failing. And a lot of companies want to be there because they want to be associated with something that's reaching the Asian American community. Or they maybe want to be associated with something that's associated with health. So they're like, yeah, I'll do a 10, I'll give you $5,000 as a lead sponsor. So that sponsorship is a little different than grant making, but I think if you feel like there is that shared value proposition, play it up. You might end up getting diverted out of the corporate foundation side to the marketing people, but more money, more money. Yeah.
Kind of a similar question, you're talking about like proposing a budget and showing other companies or foundations that you're applying for. So I think on the corporate side, just from what I've heard, is that if you include other places that you're asking, a similar corporation might be motivated to donate as sort of like, if they're donating, we should also be associated with the event, but how does that work with foundations? Are you more or less thinking, okay, they're applying to all these other places, they'll probably get funding from them, or what is that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Foundations don't collude, behind the scenes. We don't have backdoor meetings, and all agree on what we're gonna fund, but we come close to that. I mean, I'll be honest. We have a lot of conversation about, especially big ideas that are coming up. So I think, you know, looking at, if you looked at like the employment arena, and you could pretty quickly, I think, realize who's really in that in a big way. You know, you'd see it was Bremer, it was United Way, it was us, maybe Wells Fargo. So you'd be smart to try to approach all of those people together. I think because if you can convince the first one to fund it, then your chances with the others will increase if it's a peer group, you know, like the, in early childhood, for example, there's this thing called Start Early, which is a funder collaborative. And there's like 20 foundations and other kinds of funders in the mix. And so that's a great group to target. Like if you're doing early childhood stuff and you have a connection with one of them, to name drop that foundation or talk to them about, well, how can I approach this other foundation that's in this coalition with you. And I think most foundations know enough about their peers to say, like if you ask me about Bremer, I think I especially if I funded you or I'm interested in your project, I'm going to be interested in going to bat for you with Bremer because that means your work is going to be more likely to succeed if you get more money.
And I think if you're just approaching one foundation and then assuming that they're going to be the only funder, they're going to ask, well, what's going to happen if we go away? So what's your plan for sustainability if we're the only funder and our priorities happen to change?
Yeah. I mean, and at the beginning, you know, somebody's got to make a leap of faith. You've got to get some foundation to just say, oh, we'll try this out. And you know, you're just not going to have other money in your pocket to back up their grant. And that's life. That's the first grant is the hardest grant.
Yeah.
While you're thinking of your next great question, two things or one other thing I'd say is don't be put off if you send an email or you make a call and you don't get a call back. And maybe I'm projecting my own failings on my peers, but despite the fact that we're not doing tons and tons of reading grants, I actually am busy on other things. Ms. Zimmerman can attest to this. So, you know, especially if it's sort of like an unknown person emailing me or calling me, it might take me a while to get back then, or it's been known to happen that I forget to call them back. So, you know, feel free to call back. It's not a good sign if they don't call you back, but it doesn't necessarily mean they implicitly said no to you. It just means your unsolicited inquiry or whatever was not a high priority at that time. But keep trying until they say no.
Would you rather people keep calling you, or what's your sort of take on?
Every foundation will, I mean, hopefully foundations will give you an inclination about how they want to be approached. I think you'd see on our website, we're open to calls. Some foundations are not. And I think you want to go for the most personal connection you can get. So if they say, we prefer LOIs, but you can email us if you have questions, you want to email them. If they say you can contact us by email or call, you can call them. They don't say this, but if they say, you know, you can email or call us, or you can stop by our office. I mean, truthfully, nobody can. I would stop by their office if they said that, honestly.
But like if you didn't call me back, like should I keep calling you?
Yeah, like a week later or whatever, or try by email. You know, don't feel weird about it. You got nothing to lose at that point. All that shows is that you're motivated, you know, committed to whatever you're trying to raise money for.
There's a question, if you were turned down 1 year and the next year you're still trying to fund the same program, how would you recommend beefing up that?
Well, if you're trying to fund the same thing, it's not going to happen. So you need to get the foundation to give you feedback on why it was declined, and hopefully that feedback is constructive enough that you could find a different way to approach them. I mean, the other thing is, you know, it's this delicate balance, right, between doing what you think is the right thing and responding, adapting or morphing yourself to fit funders' interests. So, I mean, that's your call to make, how flexible, either, how much do you think they actually know things that add value to your program design or concept? Maybe they do, and, you know, so maybe it's worthwhile listening to them. But at some point, you know, you have to say, I'm just not going to chase money. Like, if my program is to serve adults, and this foundation only wants to serve, you know, at-risk youth, it's just, I don't want to do that. So it's, I think typically you will not get a lot of constructive, unsolicited constructive feedback from the foundation about a denial. And part of that is just we don't have time. We're not going to prioritize talking to all the people that we deny. 1, 2, it's not fun to talk to people that you decline. And 3, I'll be honest, the more you say in writing, the more you give people bullets to shoot back at you and argue with you, and it just becomes a really unpleasant conversation. So the phone call for me is a lot more comfortable place to be honest and have a conversation about why we decline something. That's something I learned from my boss. It's like, especially in the world of private philanthropy, you get, you know, I was used to government fundraising where everything is very like regimented. You know, you're scored in a certain way, and you have this kind of, you go through exactly this process, and you have this kind of recourse, and it's just like almost legalistic. And private philanthropy doesn't have to be that way. We could make decisions totally at whim. We could throw darts against a dartboard. I don't know, but we could do that for a long time and not get in trouble, but we could do that for a while and get in trouble. So, you know, I think it's you need to understand that you're not going to argue your way back into getting approved, but you also should be confident enough, I think, to ask for feedback.
I'm wondering if we could dig a little bit deeper into like new organizations and what you would be looking for to fund a brand new nonprofit that does X.
I mean, it's tough for us right now because I don't know that we would fund a new organization, or it would be very tough. We used to be a foundation that funded lots of new organizations. So, I mean, if one thing that you would want to research is recent grant-making behavior, and have they funded a lot of startups, and they're willing to fund riskier things. Some funders, there are funders that will just fund everything in a certain area, as long as it fits their like K-12 interest or their whatever, you know, interest they'll fund it. So I think from that standpoint, the bar is higher in terms of doing your homework, so that you can make a case for why you think you're adding value to the field, why you're meeting a need with something, and thinking about it maybe as a longer-term solicitation process. So anticipating you're going to get pushback from the foundation about funder, about why would we fund you when we've got these other options that are more established, and then getting the constructive feedback, even if it's not about a proposal, but it's in a phone call, and then being diligent, coming back. I think that you can wear us down. Especially if you're flattering us. This is if you're flattering us by listening to our advice, then that becomes like, oh my God, I told them to do something and then they did it. So now I have to like meet with them. And we met each other and shook hands, and now we have some sort of relationship, and all of a sudden, it gets a lot more serious.